Good afternoon, everyone, and I'd like to thank you for taking the time to dial in and watch Asia Matters China-Ireland Business Summit. Well done, and thanks to Martin for organising this event. It's something that's very close to our heart, and thinking back to this time last year, Martin, when we did the conference physically, and look forward to being able to do it again. So I hope today to follow on with some of the great statistics and work that Mr. Sung just spoke about there in terms of technology and the advancement of it between China and Europe, and in particular Ireland, and share with you a little bit of background about the China-Ireland Growth Technology Fund, of which I'm a managing partner. And this is a fund that was actually set up 8 years ago between Ireland and China. Very first project of its kind, very first technology project by China Investment Corp, which is the sovereign wealth fund of China, anywhere in Europe. And it was very much, I think, a pilot at that point in time, because we were entering into new territory of bilateral cooperation in technology. It has been a hugely successful partnership, and it has hugely benefited both Irish companies and Chinese companies, and also supported FDI into Ireland. But today I'd like to talk about obviously this two-way street that we have, but for the Irish companies also, really this fund, and obviously the first thing is capital that companies need to target the China market, but also they need value add and cross-border help and support. And so that is the primary aim of this fund. It also has a very broad technology focus. So it's not just software, but it includes product, hardware, engineering, the green agenda, renewables, and education technology. The fund is supported by people on the ground, both in Europe, in Dublin, in London, in Munich, and in Paris, and Palo Alto in the States, but also Beijing and Hong Kong. And we've just actually opened our third office in Shenzhen. Okay, so some of the sectors, particularly that we are focused on, are sectors that are of mutual interest to both Ireland and China. Obviously, enterprise software is a key focus, and advanced manufacturing, where really I would say Irish companies have a huge opportunity to supply into a Chinese market that is very advanced, and a lot of investment going into sectors like robotics and Industry 4.0, but also a lot of Irish companies availing of an access to Chinese companies for advanced manufacturing. So I'm going to show you a few examples of where Irish companies have actually partnered with very advanced Chinese companies for their product manufacturing. And that has enabled them to supply mass market globally via China. Semiconductors has always been a focus of Atlantic Bridge, as well as software. Again, it's an area that Ireland has traditionally great strengths, and of course, going back to Cork, which seems to be a very strong theme today on the panel, but Tyndall, obviously down in Cork, a really important research institute and a place that a lot of our Chinese companies have come over to, and to work with Tyndall from an R&D perspective, and also to work with Irish companies that have spun out of Tyndall. And of course, climate change and the transition to a greener, cleaner economy is a huge driver, and is now, I would say, even in the middle of the pandemic, is accelerating. And so electrical vehicle technology, battery management systems, green energy, transportation. And again, this is probably somewhere that I would say Irish companies have a lot to learn and access from the China market. So we have a portfolio of companies in China, and some of them are leading in that last mile smart mobility, companies like Ninebot that are just going public now on the China New Star market. So I think from all of these areas, there is a great opportunity for win-win, both for the Irish companies and also for the Chinese companies. And I thought it would be just helpful to take a step back and look at what is happening, despite difficult geopolitical times and the pandemic. Business is getting on with it, and we have obviously a lot of really significant investment from China into Ireland in the form of Wuxi, their manufacturing plant, and their biopharma up in Dundalk. TikTok obviously have now put their data centres and their European headquarters into Ireland, and Huawei have a long history of presence in Ireland and collaborating with Irish companies on improving software applications. And then equally, from within our portfolio, you'll see some of the companies have all set up headquarters in China and are building out sales and marketing and R&D teams in China. So it's a two-way street. One of the things that is really important, I mentioned in the introduction slide, is market access in China. And obviously, we've got some great people following on the panel. Leo from Enterprise Ireland, who will talk about what EI can help Irish companies in market access, and Bill Lau, who have a team on the ground running accelerators in China. And really, it comes down to accessing key senior relationships in the China market. It is really important for companies to make progress. So, from our perspective, our Irish companies and portfolios over the last 8 years have worked with Chinese customers and investors, and now it's moving into the stage of where you have Chinese corporate buyers and IPOs, and this is really the hard yards that has to be done by Irish companies to start with the right partner, and it's such a large market that narrowing down the sector and the partner is absolutely critical, because otherwise it can mean a lot of time is spent in a cul-de-sac, and to pick the right partner really requires a lot of local knowledge and people on the ground. And that's why I would say to any of the Irish companies that are considering the Asian and the China market, that really not to go in alone, to partner either with the likes of Enterprise Ireland or with an accelerator like SOSV or with Atlantic Bridge or with any number of the Asian VCs that Sarah Jane is going to talk about. That to have a partner is really critical, and that in itself also helps, first of all, obviously the first key win, but it also leads to more market understanding and to refinement of the product, because what we have found in most cases is that the business model is different in China, and the product is also requires amendment and pricing, obviously, as well, and that can really only be achieved with knowledgeable partners. And I thought I would give a couple of examples of some of those companies and the journeys, the Irish companies and the journey that they have made. So Movidius is an Irish company which had a AI chipset, a microprocessor enabling computer vision, basically enabling any kind of a device to see. And of course, it was rapidly adopted in some of the next generation technologies like in drones and robotics and intelligent cameras. But back in 2014, 15, that was not so clear. Those markets had not yet evolved. But interesting, it was China that became the leader in those markets. And so whilst the business originally was very much focused on the US market and had some fantastic partners in the US like Google and Magic Leap and Flickr, they really needed to also get into this large market, which was emerging at very early stages. And it was with DJI that they initially won their first order. And that was an introduction that was facilitated by ourselves because we had the relationships with the CEO and the CFO of that company. And as a result of that, the company moved very rapidly. Within a matter of weeks following due diligence, they had a customer supply agreement, which was then followed up by an investment, a small minority investment by DJI, and led to further expansion of the customer base in China. We followed that up with setting up a China office, headquarters, and started to also, build product and amend product for the Chinese market in China. And we built out quite a large sales and marketing and R&D team. And all of that actually happened quite rapidly, which is probably more a reflection of the underlying markets of where drones and robotics and AR/VR was back then. But it got to the point where by 2017, you'll see that 2/3 of the company's business was being generated out of Asia. And it was really off the back of that traction in Asia that Intel acquired the business in 2016, and have obviously continued the investment in the platform here in Ireland, where the bulk of the R&D was. But again, that was a very step-by-step approach, a strategy that was laid out by the company with ourselves for tackling the opportunity in the China market. Decawave was another semiconductor company making semis and software for really precise location-based technology, and this was a company that we invested in, and at the time when we invested, most of the business was here in Ireland with some good, strong European automotive customers, but nothing in China. Maybe some initial first steps, but nobody on the ground in China, and no real substantial customers. So one of the first things we did was to hire a general manager for China, and also to start building the Asian headquarters for the company in Shenzhen, and to introduce the company to some of the key early partners, one of which was Huawei and the other was China Mobile. And we built out the business in China also with companies like Ninebot that I referred to earlier, that were doing that last stage mobility. And off the back of that customer growth, and this was a particular technology that didn't just go into things like last mile mobility or automotive. It also went into industrial and also into the mobile phone. And actually, Apple announced in 2019 that they were going to put this technology into the iPhone. And it was really a combination of moves in the US and the traction in China that the company was acquired by Qorvo in January of this year. And finally, a company that I'm currently heavily involved with is a company called Novaris Wellair, which spun out key plasma technology originally from DCU here in Dublin. And they have a plasma-based technology which was very much focused at the healthcare market and hospitals for sterilizing the air using plasma, which traps and kills viruses and pathogens and pollutants that are in the air. We invested in this company back in 2016 and had a China roadmap. Now, it's interesting, and I would say this for a lot of Irish companies, it's a very gradual process. At the point in time we invested, this company did not have any presence in China, and we effectively spent the last 2 years, I'd say 2 to 3 years, beginning that process. And the first thing was to find a really good manufacturing partner for the business in China that would be able to mass manufacture the business and the product rather at a price point for the Chinese market. And we've been working on that since 2018. Had that in place and started, and the partner is one of the great Chinese champion companies called Galance, who have, as well as having manufacturing, have distribution. They have 40,000 stores across China. So the company was very much focused on the US and European markets and had a strategy for the China market, as I said, which was very much partner-based. And last year we signed that agreement with Galance whereby they would help take the product to market. And you can actually just see there in July 2020, obviously COVID hit in Q1 and certainly set our plans back, but also accelerated, obviously, the market adoption of the technology. And now the technology is being used widely across hospitals across the world, but not just in hospital settings, but also in enterprise, in consumer, and in helping enterprises open back up safely. So markets like hospitality, markets where people want to have confidence for consumers to be able to come in and know that the air and that the environment is safe and clean. So this is a company that is scaling and growing very rapidly. They have just established an Asian headquarters in Shanghai. We've just set up the company. We're putting an engineering team on the ground in Shund in Guangdong. And we have great plans to scale the business in China as well as worldwide. And the manufacturing of the product will be done by Galance, which will support the scale up of this Irish company. As I said, it's growing at about 5x this year, and Galance will enable us to supply, mass manufacture the product worldwide, including in the US, Europe, as well as China. So again, another example of an Irish company that has taken a very codified, I suppose, series of steps gradually, but of course nothing goes according to plan, and has changed their plan and has managed to, as I said, to grow very, very rapidly despite COVID. And obviously the Asian markets have recovered quicker than some of the European or the US markets. So again, that's another benefit for Irish companies being spread into those different markets. So with that, I'd like to hand back to Barry from KPMG, who's going to chair the panel discussion with Bill, Sarah Jane, and with Leo. Thanks very much for taking the time.
Is working. We're safely back in panel view. Thank you for those remarks, right? And well done to you and all the success of Atlantic Bridge over the last 8 years. I think the examples really bring it to life. Just before we kick off the panel for the next hour, we're just going to do a brief intro. My name is Barry O'Connell. I'm partner in KPMG Ireland. I was responsible for the relationship between KPMG Ireland and KPMG China. So looking at outbound investment market entry into China, but also working with Chinese companies looking at Ireland on the inbound. And I had a direct involvement myself with a number of Chinese companies, which I think hopefully will help the discussion today as we tease out some of the issues and further discussion from Elaine. So I might hand over to Sarah Jane just to do a quick intro of yourself, if that's okay.
Thanks, Barry, and thanks, Elaine. My name is Sarah Jane Larkin, and I'm the Director General of the Irish Venture Capital Association. So our association represents Irish venture capital and private equity funds that in the last number of years have invested over €5 billion into high growth potential Irish SMEs and SMEs that are global in their outlook and have China in their sights.
Great, and maybe Bill?
Gravamila Mahagat Barry.
August Lampain.
G'day everyone. 欢迎大家，我是Liao Bill, and I have the privilege of being a general partner with SOSV. We're a global firm with very strong Irish roots. SOSV stands for Sean O'Sullivan. And I'm delighted to be here just to talk about our impact in China and how China has had a huge impact on our startups. And we do find ourselves, interestingly, in these very bizarre times, to be the most active VC in the world, according to TechCrunch and PitchBook.
Great, Bill. Cool. And Leo?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Leo McAdams. I am the Investment Services Manager with Enterprise Ireland. As many of you are aware, Enterprise Ireland is the government agency that supports Irish-owned companies to generate exports which then increases employment in Ireland and prosperity. So delighted to be here this afternoon.
Great. So good afternoon and good evening to those of you listening in from the East, right? And we get kicked off now through the panel. I think, Elaine, you mentioned quite a bit about market entry and the importance of relationships, knocking down cul-de-sacs. And that certainly resonated with me on another session this morning. There was an example of China's a market of 1,000 niches. And maybe you only need to be good in less than 10 niches to be successful. I'd maybe like just to go across the panel and get a perspective, and maybe Bill, kick it off with you. You know, what's important on market entry when you're looking at China?
I think the most important thing, I agree 100% about, China being a market of many niches, but like a small niche in China is like the entire market in a lot of countries. So niche is a hard word. But the thing that I will come back to over and over again with all the startups that we work with is speed. Yeah, the pace of getting stuff done in China is so much quicker, and while the networks are interesting and the market is interesting and it's all complex, if you can't do business at that speed, if you've never been at that speed, you haven't lived in it, it's really hard to ramp up to the speed and match the expectations to fulfill any niche, actually across Asia.
Sarah, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I would add a little bit to that. Obviously, I think Bill and Elaine probably have much more in-depth knowledge of China as a market. What we would see as the Venture Capital Association is the first thing is awareness. We often have conversations in Ireland about whether we're closer to Boston or Berlin, but very rarely do we mention Beijing. And I think, when you look at the startups in Ireland and you look at the scene here, how thriving it is, how many companies are growing and scaling. In our Q2 figures, we had the highest quarterly total on record. And when you look at those companies, most are in the areas, or at least 50% were in fintech and life sciences, so very global industries, and industries that because of COVID are less likely to suffer a downturn. And as we all know, when you're sitting in Ireland at the moment, we're facing into some really seismic economic ruptures with Brexit on the horizon and exactly how that's going to pan out. And then also the impact to the economy driven by COVID. So I think whenever there's a rupture or a crisis, it's a good opportunity not to let it go to waste. And I think really changing a little more of our orientation and having a bit more focus on Asian markets and the Asian opportunity is something that we would hope to see in the coming years.
So maybe Barry,
we'll come back to that shortly. Yeah, Leo. Yeah.
And just on that point that Sarah Jane has said there in terms of increased focus, I think from the Irish State's point of view, and we have put a lot of resource and investment into, let's say, Asia Pac and China over the last 30 years, and that's increasing. We ourselves now, we have new offices in Vietnam. We added an additional office in Australia, and we have increased our Pathfinder network. So for us, Asia Pac is, and when you look at the economics and the shift in economic power, from west to east, it is an absolute must in terms of where we're seeing opportunity, and that's the opportunity side. When we look at the region itself, it's over 2 billion in exports, which is significant when you compare it to our nearest neighbour, the UK. And I'm just talking about Irish indigenous exports. UK is 7.5 billion. So I think the question for us is, given the opportunity in the region, like how do we really kick on and get that 2 billion to 4 billion to 6 billion really quickly?
No, that's interesting. I think sorry, Bill, go ahead.
Can I jump in there? There's kind of two different business levels. You've got the how do you make it into a market, which is great, but there's also how do you get your business going in the first place? And there is a reason why we put our accelerator programs in Shenzhen. Because when an Irish team, like intelligent implants, comes from all over Europe, and they go to Shenzhen with a medical device. The speed at which they can iterate that device and get product market fit is literally 50 to 100 times faster. Because, at 2 a.m. in the morning, when they run into a technical problem, they can literally walk downstairs in the building to the electronics market, which is still open, and find the part they need. It's just a completely different pace of life. So I think at the early phases, one of the great things about exposure to China is being able to speed up your venture, to be able to turbocharge it and get it into like the top world class in getting things done quickly. And then that then allows you to be visible in China, which also allows you to access markets, access networks, access cash. I mean, we see a lot of Chinese funding rounds now, a lot of Chinese VCs making quick investments in partnership with other VCs around the world. Despite the tensions, I see deals with us and Horizon and other Asian investors also, bringing in, people like Sequoia and other big international VCs. Those sorts of partnerships are much quicker when there's a Chinese flavor in our experience. And that's why we just advocate at the front end to get to China, to go there, to spend time there, and to really iterate there for a while. And then come back to Ireland and avail of all the amazing supports and the networks and, frankly, a livable life.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to see the growth of Shenzhen over 30, 40 years from a fishing village to now of, 20 million people and continuing exponential growth and technology and innovation and ideas, right?
I actually was there in 1974, visiting from Australia, try to visit my family. And we did the border crossing from Guangdong through Shenzhen. And Shenzhen literally was a fishing village and rice paddies, and they were very proud of it. And it has changed so fast. It is just, every time I've gone back there, I just cannot believe, it's like building New York City over and over and over again within the last 20 years, let alone 40.
Yeah, and it is hard to believe that probably within 90 minutes of getting off the plane in Hong Kong, you can be across the border and in Shenzhen, operational mainland China. So, it's achievable and doable. Maybe, Elaine, just a perspective, and Sarah Jane and Leo mentioned, how do we get Ireland better known? How do we get the companies seen, visible? I mean, what do you think we need to be doing more of to build that profile, both for VCs and Irish companies, to be attractive, and to Bill's point about partnering on maybe VCs even, attracting more investment here?
I think it's something there that Bill talked about. I do strongly feel that, particularly in China, if you want, or in Asia, relationships with investors, there has to be, personal connections. So you have to spend time there. So one of the things I'm missing, I'll be honest, is whilst I have a team on the ground in Beijing and Hong Kong, and I'm on Zoom with them every week, and I'm missing not being out there. I would agree with what Bill said about speed, and the China of old, where relationships evolve very gradually, is not the case in technology. It's very quick, and but it absolutely does involve FaceTime. And so from our perspectives, bringing some of these Irish companies that then support some key Chinese champions raises awareness about the strength of Irish technology and R&D in a positive way. Being there, going on trade missions with Leo and Enterprise Ireland, I mean, we would do that, and our companies would do that as much as possible. And of course, that's very difficult, and we hope, obviously, in the future, we'll be able to get back to doing that. So at the moment, it's definitely a challenge, Barry. It's something that we're doing via events like this and Zoom to reach out. And of course, having the existing base and having people in country enables us to continue the work. But you've got to get out there. And I think the work that EI do and IDA here and on the inbound stuff and the FDI that you're working on also raises awareness. So you're absolutely right. I mean, the China would have the world in countries like Australia and lots of great other tech centers around the world doing business with them. So awareness is key, and I would say our awareness, Ireland as a center of innovation, awareness is not high in China. I think they probably see us as a very clean, green country, and our dairy and food is quite strong. And somehow we've got to be able to leverage that into technology and life sciences. And the Wuxi FDI, Wuxi is a big Chinese champion and a really well-regarded company. So their base actually, that will drive a lot of awareness. But so it's things like that, landmark transactions.
Yeah, you do see in landmark transactions when they happen, others tend to follow. Yeah. So that investment mark for Ireland creates credibility, and we see that in the aviation sector as well. When the Chinese banks have based their aviation operations here, now all the Chinese banks run their aviation, and Ireland is seen as best in class in that area. I'm interested in Elaine's comment on Enterprise Ireland and supports and trade missions, actually, of which I've been on, and they're invaluable, right? Do you want to comment actually on how they work and what they bring and the support on the ground in the Far East, which I think is just a different turf for some of us to be operating in, right?
Yeah. So I think you need to put the word virtual in front of everything that we're doing now. So just to give you an example, every year we run our International Markets Week. And so we've run it, I'd say, probably 30, 40 years at this stage. And it's normally in the center of town, and we have over 600 companies. We bring all of our offices back, our marketing advisors, and there's meetings set up, and obviously our Asia Pac team is a key part of that. So this year, in the next couple of weeks, we have a virtual International Markets Week, where we're going to have the same number of companies and the same number of meetings, but we're doing it all virtually. So it's a great opportunity for companies who can obviously be in situ and can connect into all of our offices around the world. So the virtual piece and the whole digital transformation that companies are undergoing is key, I think, going forward in terms of connecting to places like China, which are, as we all know, it's difficult now to travel into. So the virtual piece is going to be, our way forward for the foreseeable future. And in terms of what we do, whether it be virtual or on the ground, I mean, the first thing when we talk about China is it's not for every company. I mean, let's be clear about that. So, we don't go out there and beat the drums to say everybody come into China, because that's just not going to work. So we do have a filtering system where we look at companies, and it's not based on their size. It's really based on their technology, their offer, and their kind of business plan and their market fit. So we look at a company's market fit and say, actually, that would really work well in China. Then the next question is, do they have the financial capability? And that's where people like Elaine and Bill come into play, and the other VCs and funders. And then the third piece is around their commitment, the understanding they have to localize, they have to take on a partner, and this is for the long term. So, and I mean, I know we have got, we can do more, but we do have, and we've talked about infant formula, the presence that has on the ground, and the education, the amount of Chinese students here, the integrated network of having the HEIs do JVs in China is huge. It's absolutely huge, and that does then trickle into innovation as well. So, and then we mentioned the FDI and the financial services, and then some of the big names coming in. So I think our trajectory has been really positive, and it's gathering pace. But again, it's to accelerate that pace. It's to accelerate us getting to a larger volume of exports into the market.
Right, and Leo, I think I completely identify with all that, and I can't say our Enterprise Ireland and Team Ireland, whether it be the IDA, or indeed Therese Healy and the team in Shanghai, who's now assistant in Beijing, recently appointed, and from Cork, what they do and help you, and it all gets done together with Borbia, with everyone working together in Shanghai House is amazing to see, right? Yeah. So a great first step is getting on one of those trade missions or leveraging what Enterprise Ireland can bring and connecting up with your team. Sergey, do you see much activity coming from the Far East currently, or where do you see it at the moment?
Well, not as much as we would like, and maybe before I go into that, I'll just build on something that Leo said around the linkages, the education, the building layers and layers of relationships and networking. That has started and that has begun. Of the 5 billion euro that Irish VCs invested in the last number of years, there was an additional 3 billion invested that came into Ireland from overseas and typically syndicated through local Irish VC partners. to date, a very small proportion of that is actually coming from China. And I think the path that Elaine has trod and Bill in making some of those linkages and establishing an awareness of Ireland, and the research and the technology base that we have here in a lot of key sectors is absolutely vital. And I think as we go forward, in Ireland, globally around 50% of VC funding comes from very large corporates in a particular country who will invest in early stage technology in order to get a first look at a new idea. And in Ireland, we simply don't have that depth of local enterprises here, probably with the exception of some of the guys in the food space and the food ingredient space. In other sectors, it's less so. So, I think we were really interested in corporate VC and in companies from overseas investing, because what we have in Ireland with Enterprise Ireland is a world-class development agency, and the seed and venture scheme is crucial for most of our VCs, but we've never quite matched that with the same level of intent in attracting and mobilizing private capital to the market here. So, when you see names like Cathay Capital and Huawei Capital, large Chinese corporates that have investment divisions, that's the logical next step, and to create vehicles that would mobilize some of that capital to our companies in Ireland. And linkages and events like this are really crucial in developing that relationship.
And just maybe to the acceleration point, and I think it's very well made, right? So how, maybe to Elaine and Bill, how do we unlock that further to tap into more of that Far Eastern money? And I think Sarah Jane talked about linkages and relationship. But what really accelerates and unlocks that for Ireland, or creates that visibility?
I would maybe just comment to say, and Bill will probably be able to give a perspective on this too, China has such opportunity on its doorstep. It is a tall, hard ask, in my view, for Irish companies to secure funding from Asian or Chinese investors. That's not to say we can't do it, but I think a much more logical step. So first of all, the companies that Bill is seeding and accelerating in China have a very strong chance because they're on the ground and there's so many VCs. I mean, you've just no idea how competitive, and to Bill's point, how fast the market is there. And I mean, the types of returns that are being made, super, super competitive. So I think, and they have so much, so it's a bit like the guys in the US in Palo Alto. They don't really need to go too many blocks from their office to get great opportunities to invest. And obviously with the pandemic, it's even harder for Asian outreach and for companies to travel and trust and build the relationships. So my perspective is that I think the route where you have, either early stage companies seeded there, which are effectively hybrids, Bill's companies of Irish, Chinese, Asian companies, and or working with corporate partners that are, likely to be customers and or investors, is actually the best route we have found for Irish companies. Now, what I will say is, as we have got those companies on the ground in China and scaled them and grown them, then we have, and obviously we're 8 years now doing it, which is just, not a long time in this business. Yeah. But because, to what Bill says, the market moves so fast, we've been able to build up lots, and we have a Chinese VC partner also. So we've lots of those relationships. So I think that's probably our best route in those two routes, corporate and with, the kind of model that we have done, Atlantic Bridge, and the kind of model that Bill has done. I think cold expectations that Irish companies would secure funding from Asian money, it's a tall order, it's a tall ask. Bill?
Yeah, well, I got a few things to say. The first thing
is, agree with me.
Yeah, some of that. I agree with a lot of what you say. But I got to say, forgive me, Leo, but screw virtual. You are much safer in Shenzhen than you are in Dublin right now. So get on a freaking plane, wear your respirator and go there and spend some time there. For me, looking at all the startups, China is for everyone because it gives you that speed and it gives you access to all the things that you're going to need to get over that first hump with your product. go there, go through an accelerator, preferably one of ours, and actually get to product market fit and get your first $1 million done within 6 months. Like, I mean, we're talking real speed here, right? And then come back. So what strategy one, hop on a plane and get into one of the accelerators, you know, and it's hard to get into one of our accelerators, but do it. Two, you know, if you are at all interested in making Ireland a really great place for visibility for Chinese investment, then encourage Chinese limited partners to invest in Irish funds.
Yeah.
Like one of the things that we have a China fund that's being invested in by a European fund, sorry, that's being launched also with a lot of Chinese investment, but we took a lot of LPs into our main fund from Asia, and they are extremely into co-investment, you know, much more so than others of our LPs. Not just the corporate LPs, you know, the big family offices, everything. There's a huge possibility to get them into our capital markets because they trust us. You know, Ireland has a huge cachet of trust globally. We are considered a very livable, very legal, very you know, respectable and honest country, and that is a good place to put money. And if our funds are also supporting companies that are going to China, selling to China, buying from China, interacting, and we bother to do press releases in China, you know, I've spoken to a few PR agencies here in Ireland about some of our companies, and I always ask the question, so when's the release in Shenzhen? When's the release in Beijing? And they're like, oh, we were just going to do New York. And I'm like, ah! Yeah. Really? Seriously? So don't be virtual, get into an accelerator, get on a plane, and let's bring as many LPs to Ireland and Irish funds as we possibly can. And that's an area of outreach that I don't think we're really doing anything near enough about. I think it's something that EI, ISIF, IBCA should all be going, you know, where's our LP roadshow for all the Irish funds? You know, that is, you know, the possibility of a huge capital movement to a super trusted jurisdiction. And
yeah, no, point well made, Bill. Point well made, right? And I can see the energy and enthusiasm. You absolutely believe that as well, right? Which is great. Can I ask you maybe just one sector? Obviously, SOS has medtech accelerators, right? I think is it Hack or Hacks is one of your accelerators. Can you make it real? So if you were to get into Hacks in China and Ireland has credibility in medtech, what should an Irish company be looking to do to go and come back? Maybe just to tease it out, make a brief example, if you don't mind.
So the level second you have a prototype and you have a team, you should apply to and get into Hacks, right? Because Hacks is our hardware accelerator. Now, if it's hardcore biotech or therapeutics, you should apply to IndieBio, either in New York or San Francisco, because those programs are about, you know, that sort of stuff. But if you're talking about a medical device, you're talking about medtech in general, even medtech software, you should apply to Hacks or you should apply to Mox, and you should just go. And you should only go once you have a team that's willing to travel and a prototype. And what will happen when you get there? You'll get cash straight away. You'll get some of the best mentors in the world. You will get one-on-one interaction with every manufacturer in your supply chain that you could ever want. And you'll be connected to the distributors that look to take up products all over the world, you know, both in China and outside. You know, we don't see businesses from the perspective of, oh, I sell into this market or that market. We see the whole world as the market, and we see China as the leaping off place for that. And so you look at, like, Intelligent Implants is one of my favorite examples. Here's a company of engineers that built a prototype for an implant that regrows your spine after spinal fusion surgery with electricity. It actually uses your body's tissues to 3D print a bone graft in your spine. It's the most repeated surgery in the world. So these guys, Irish and Swedish, got together. They all said, right, we're going to China. They went to Hacks. They spent 3 months there. They got their prototype finished. They got all the connections for their animal trials, and they got connected to Johnson & Johnson in Texas. You know, all through that one thing, and they have just blown it up. I mean, you know, it takes a long time to get a medical device to market. They're still going to be 3 to 5 years sooner to market than they ever would have if they hadn't have done it in China. And that's huge. That's like, in terms of founder equity, that's whole tens of percentage points that you as a founder will get to keep because you're going to get there faster, cheaper.
Yeah. Good. Sarah Jane, how does that sound to you? Do you think Irish entrepreneurs are willing to take that risk and spend the time in a China accelerator? How do you see that? Or are they more content to maybe stay local? I think that Bill's challenge earlier.
Yeah, I think that, there is a valid point there and a valid challenge that Bill is setting out. In my experience, some are. And as with most things in life, it's pretty individual and it depends on your particular circumstances and stage. I think the path is getting more well trodden. So I think while maybe few have done it to date, more and more will, and particularly as things speed up, and again, I know Bill, you were mentioning, forget about virtual, but in some ways the virtual actually almost brings up more of an opportunity for those companies that are based here at a very early stage, because everyone is on your doorstep when you're connecting in this way, but you need to work hard to make those connections. But in some ways, as the world moves more virtually, there's almost more equality of access to people in different countries.
Yeah, but if you have to make something out of atoms, you can't do it virtually.
Fair enough.
and almost every medical device is made out of atoms. So you've got to move atoms around. And when you talk about things being on your doorstep, if you go to Shenzhen, literally everything is on your doorstep. Here in Ireland, not as much. And we track all of our applicants from all over the world into our programs. And we have had Irish applicants, that's true. But, normally we hear about Ireland punching above its weight. No, in this case, Ireland is not yet punching above its weight, and it should.
Yeah. And I think, there are great resources in Ireland, the medtech community in Ireland around Galway, the BioInnovate program. There's a lot of, good things there. But I certainly take the point that there is probably a better way to plug some of, that work into, a more global.
In terms of innovation, in terms of actually the ideation stage, BioInnovate Galway has one of the best programs in the world because they actually have this tremendous insight. Send young things into the surgery, into the hospitals with experienced medical people and figure out what the problem is. That's a great start. Finding out the best problem in the world to solve. BioInnovate are literally world leaders at that. There is absolutely a huge gap. And I'm invested in some of those companies and I see the gap all the time. The pace of getting those prototypes made, certified, and mass produced is just so painfully slow in comparison to what I see routinely happen in Shenzhen.
Okay. No, that's good.
And it doesn't mean you can't be a Galway company, go to Shenzhen and go back. I'm not saying, let's give all our technology to the world. I'm saying go to China and literally accelerate there and then bring it back to good old Ireland and use that as the basis for your very tax-friendly global empire.
No, good. Elaine, maybe just
You've inspired me, Bill.
Elaine, the other point that Bill made a while ago in terms of limited partners and investment, obviously there's been legislation published this week now around the new Limited Partnership Act. And I know Irish funds have been actively in Beijing and Shanghai over the last couple of years to attract, more, to build a profile, as Bill has alluded to. Do you, in your travels, or do you see Ireland being attractive for, Far Eastern money from limited partners coming in or co-investing, or is there more awareness to do? Are we at the early stages, perhaps?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, just our experience, obviously, CIC are probably now will shortly overtake the Norwegians and be the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. And they have now invested twice in two funds with ourselves. And out of that, then, that drives tremendous credibility for our fund and name in China and our companies, more importantly, our companies. So when Well-Air Novaris goes to do business in China and they realize, when the customer realizes that they're backed by the Chinese Sovereign Wealth Fund, it gives them a whole level of, I suppose, credibility and defense, I would say. So I think, again, to talk about 1,000 niches, and a niche being, there's just so many opportunities that we have to pick which ones we're going to be most successful with. And interestingly enough, that relationship with CIC has been really important, both commercially, but also for the two governments. So, Leo from Enterprise Ireland and all of the team in NTMA and ISIF would be really absolutely fundamental to that relationship. So when I go to meet with CIC, I meet them with Enterprise Ireland, I meet them on the trade missions, I meet them with our government, I meet them with our ministers, I meet them. And so it's a whole of approach is really, really important. And I think from that, we have subsequently added other Asian and Chinese LPs, but we started there, and it's a big beast. It's $1 trillion almost fund. It's a 900-something billion fund. Just to put that in context, I think our GDP is about 2. So it's like four Irelands. Okay, so it's big, and it takes time, and it takes that level of government support. And it's strategic. So, and then from that, I think we build out. So I think there is opportunity, but I would caution that, just to what Bill's talking about, there is tremendous opportunity in China and Southeast Asia. So it really needs to be companies that are willing to, first of all, have very unique, defensible, world-beating technology, whether that's in, life sciences, med tech, software, whatever, hardware. They really must have, best of breed. And I think, Leo said it is not for everyone, and they do not ask every company or tell every company, client company in EI, to go to China. And that's why, because it's also the road, there's many a company that has failed on that road. And I think it can damage a lot of companies if they go and they're not differentiated enough, and they're not ready to do it, and they're not ready to commit the capital and the resources that are needed to be successful. So I think there is an opportunity. Our experience has been that it was very important to win a couple of really key LPs, and to also be able to show them great companies like Decawave, Movidius, Weller, the world-leading companies. Bill talked about intelligent inputs plants. It has to be companies that really have something differentiated and defensible.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have to lead. We have to first show our commitment to these companies by investing, and then we have to deliver the results. And so the involvement of Enterprise Ireland in these companies is really important, because, the Chinese say, why is your government not supporting this company? If they, so EI support is critical in the China market. Again, adds another layer of credibility to these companies. So that has been my experience. And I would also always reiterate, for every one, product that we have in the West, in China, there's 28 of them, and you have to battle 28 to win. So,
And Elaine, I think all great points, right? And just to pick up on one thread, you can have business to business, but actually, if you're trying to do business with a state-owned enterprise or government connection, without that governmental layer, Ireland to Ireland, and indeed actually a people culture to culture layer, you need to bring all together. And Leo, I'd like you to come in on that, actually, to maybe just comment on the, over the last 10 years, I think it's been a step change in what the Irish government has tried to do at a governmental level, but also at agency level. To Peter Elaine's point there, supporting companies and adding a layer of credibility if it's a HPSU or already has Enterprise Ireland money on board, perhaps. Do you want to maybe comment and tease that out? Might be on mute, I think.
Leo.
Sorry, Leo, we can't hear you. It was going so well.
Yeah, we have to have a tech blip.
It's only a blip. We let Elena work that out in the background. Bill, I don't know, do you want to maybe just that comment on EI pref shares or investment or name associated with a company? Do you see that, just that the value that brings, I think, when you're going China to China, that governmental link or that state-owned enterprise association, perhaps, right?
Really depends on what the intention is, right? So if you're going to try and sell into China and you're looking for Chinese partnership and support, and a lot of that support is government backed, right, or it's government connected. It's very true that if you don't have a government connection here, actually it's the same everywhere. If you're trying to sell into that particular market and you're trying to get avail of local government support, if you don't have remote government support, you're behind the eight ball for sure. I would say though that you know, there is a very big difference between picking China as a market and picking China as a supplier.
Yeah.
So, you know, I would advocate that young technology companies can iterate their product and perfect it in China faster than anywhere else, and then they can protect it because they're not widely exposing it, and they can. And we have really good ways of breaking up the technology and distributing it around different suppliers, so they don't know what they're building, but they are actually making it go faster. And then there's a big difference to saying, okay, I'm going to take the Chinese market. You know, that is a how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time sort of question. And the one of the big things that people underestimate is just how hard it is to open even a second market, especially if you haven't perfected the first market. You know, I see a lot of companies that can't sell anywhere saying, okay, we're now going to go to the biggest market and try and sell there. Yeah. It's like that old thing, you know, somebody says they're going to open the first Uzbekistani restaurant in New York, and they say there's no other Uzbekistani restaurant, so we got no competition. And they fail to realize that they're literally competing with every single other type of cuisine in the world in New York.
Yeah. And Barry, just to pick up on your point about, you know, the Irish government and the support and how important that is. You know, I think Elaine was, you know, pretty detailed in, you know, what she said, but in my experience, both in this role and in previous incarnations in my employment, you know, one of the huge strengths in Ireland is actually our size. And it's actually, you know, how aligned every government over the last 10 to 20 years and beyond has been around Ireland Inc., economic development, FDI, and the really vital importance of strong governmental trade links, you know, to key economies. And I think that is something that in some ways, you know, you may take for granted living here, but it is a huge plus having, you know, been on trade missions and, you know, seen how many doors that, you know, that close, long-term, well-developed relationship and the primacy that it's given by the Irish government and their agencies, you know, it's a huge advantage for Ireland.
No, I couldn't agree more, actually, because even from a Cork perspective, the work that Cork City was first Irish city to twin with an Asian city, that's over 10 years now. But the work of Anne Doherty and others in the last number of years, and Pat Ledge, which has really stepped that up. And actually, you can see that in Shanghai. And Cork is not going to all the cities. It goes to Shanghai and Nanjing or Guangzhou regions only. And it's that penetration point. Go to the same place multiple times and don't be spraying yourself too thin. So completely agree, right? And it does add something when you're trying to get access then to Shanghai companies. We've got a couple of Q&A in, right? And maybe we'll go across these. So we're not going to get away without a trade war question, right? US-China. So Kraken U has submitted a question saying, you know, does the potential or the ongoing tension US-China create opportunities from a VC perspective for Ireland or some challenges? Maybe just a perspective or a comment from
I would, you know, it's not to sit on the fence, but I would say both. It's definitely, you know, global tensions for the most globalized economy in the world is a challenge. So when there's any kind of tension globally for Ireland, it's a challenge. So, you know, as a neutral country that is very open and supplies and wants to supply, you know, all the big markets, and that's a challenge for all of us. I mean, I think that's the backdrop, and business, I find, has to navigate that and get on with it as best they can. You know, you talked about, Barry, Cork and the twinning and cultural, and Leo talked about the third levels, and all of that really helps because it's personal relationships, which at the end of the day, we're all human and we want to do business and we need trust and we need, you know, relationships. So I think the things that Ireland is doing culturally and from a business point of view, and our commitment to the China market and maintaining that commitment to the Asian, not just China, but the Asian market. You know, Leo talked about, we have, you know, 2 billion in exports. How do we get it to 4? In other words, we're not backing off. We're trying to grow. We're trying to develop. We're trying to move it on. And I think if we, in tough times, continue to show commitment to these markets, that is valued. Certainly in China, that is valued, and vice versa. So, I think, to be honest with you, it's a negative for global GDP. There's going to be some pockets of opportunity. It's a bit like Brexit. You have some sectors in Ireland, like financial services, probably, and commercial property up until now has done well because of Brexit. But generally speaking, it's a negative for the country. And I think the trade tensions, I think, very similar.
Bill, maybe a perspective?
Yeah, I mean, anything that adds friction to business is stupid. And trade wars are actually not easy to win, and they are fundamentally stupid. And like many of these things, they could go away overnight, possibly after November. Who knows? I think, because we deal with startups so much, I think if as a startup you're navel-gazing about trade wars and their implication, you're probably looking in the wrong place at the biggest threats to your business. So there's, certain businesses, sure, but really I think it's just look for your opportunities in a different way, and focus on the things that really matter. Getting to the market in the right time, making sure that you've got an excellent product, and making sure that you've got enough lines in the water to get bites both on fundraising and on sales. And if you've got those things right, then you'll weather a trade war.
That's great. Just maybe touching on other current issues, and I suppose Leo back on audio. I did see him pop back in there. We'll come back to it. That higher education point, Elaine, as well made, and connections, whether it be with UCC in Shanghai or indeed with I've seen Gerald Donovan on the bicycle in Vietnam, and the relationships that CIT have. And I was hugely impressed on one trip before when we went to an engineering university, and the credibility that CIT had because of its throughput of engineers in Ireland, and the Chinese entity really wanted to partner with them. So maybe just how important higher education is from an Irish perspective, linking with China. And again, Sarah, do you want to comment on that perhaps?
Yeah, well, one thing I was just going to say, we're doing a lot of work at the moment, around pre-budget and lots of conversations with government. And, one piece that really seems to be shaping up to be important is it's not a new department, but the department and the kind of amalgamation of certain strands that Simon Harris is now going to be in charge of, looking at higher education and research. So there's a huge commitment, I think, and you're going to see it in the national development, maybe not in the budget in October, but the national development plan, which is hopefully going to come out in November. I think you're going to see a real commitment to that sector and to that ability of Ireland to produce those kinds of really high caliber researchers and innovators, and to link that better through to industry and to firepower, kind of more innovation. So certainly I think it's something we have a good track record in, but in the soundings that I'm picking up, it's something that's going to really be accelerated, because luckily, as we were all old enough to remember the last really seismic downturn, but I think luckily heading into this one, there's less requirement to cut, and there's more ability to really invest in those kind of counter-cyclical economic policies that are going to drive the growth of the future. And higher education, I think, is shaping up to be one of those.
Yeah, and I know, Bill, the Irish universities and technology universities have been looking to, increase Far Eastern presence in Ireland. That's obviously challenged now due to, the pandemic and things being more virtual and its competitive marketplace. The importance of education to the discussion we're having, and Ireland's place in that, right? What's your reaction or response to that? Okay,
so the most valuable thing that I think people can learn is to code. In today's world, code. Yeah,
that's why I founded.
Code. That's why I founded Coder Dojo in Cork, and that's why I've been delighted that it's grown globally. If you look at Sir Ken Robinson's work in this area, the most valuable thing that you can do is apply divergent thinking, and unfortunately, education tends to oppose divergent thinking. So, if you want to look at the best coders in the world, they tend to have kind of skipped third level, and they tend to have spent many years learning to code and actually learning to be super creative. And I think there is a huge dividend that we could be availing of in terms of getting more and more people to creatively code and then give that to the world, because in China and in Japan and in a lot of other more formal education systems that are highly competitive, they've really lost that divergent thinking edge. And that's why you still see, more than anything else, designed in California, manufactured in China, right? It is a really hard nut to crack to offer the right level of divergent thinking, and that's a deeply powerful cultural thing that Ireland has, is, we are amazingly creative in this country. And if you give the tool of coding, whether it's coding biology to make new life, whether it's coding engineering to make new machines, or whether it's coding code to make new software, there's a reason why we have great companies here that have real creativity, and it's all down to creative thinking and code.
Good. Elaine, you look slightly frowning. Have you a different perspective?
No, I'm thinking and listening. I think over the long term, Bill is absolutely right. And if you just look at the numbers in terms of what China is churning out engineering wise, it's somewhere between 6 and 10 million engineers, I think, a year. So clearly we can't compete in the numbers, but absolutely we can in the quality. And I think they respect, areas of focus and strength. So, the number one engineering school in the world is not Stanford. It's Tsinghua in Beijing now. So, they don't just have quantity, they also have quality, a great quality. So I think it's a huge challenge, and what Bill is advocating is absolutely, I think over the long arc of history, a key skill set that are the generations coming, that are younger than us now and coming behind us, and our children and our children's children, it's kind of the equivalent of, you don't just need to do maths and English now, you need to do coding. So I totally agree on that. I think from the practicalities of today, how do we get there quicker, faster? I would love to see us having more inter-university cooperation on R&D. So we have a university fund here in Ireland. I would love our university fund to be able to partner with Tsinghua and with other universities. I think that would build great trust and collaboration and multidisciplinary and multicultural teams. A lot of the stuff that Bill was talking about, speed and learning, that would be one way of doing it. And I would like to also see places like Tyndall, where we've already started, some work, and where they have great admiration for, the advanced and applied R&D that's going on in Tyndall, that we would also maybe get some joint projects off the ground. So we haven't done that yet, Barry, we haven't been able to do it yet.
I agree with all those points. And actually, it's interesting. The Tyndall business director is Hugh Smithy, guy we may know just in the networks. Spent 12 years in Singapore before he came back to Tyndall, right? So so the point, right?
I'd like to see us, start that those cooperations and partnerships, despite the difficult backdrop. Despite, obviously, it's very difficult from a travel point of view. It's very difficult from a global tension point of view. But I'm absolutely convinced that's the right thing to do.
And we're heading into our last 15 minutes, right? So we'll try and cover as much as we can. And we've already covered quite a bit, I think. One question that's coming from the panel, and again, for everyone to give a perspective, is a lot of focus recently on female founders and promoting that area out of Ireland. And there's definitely been growth. How do you see the female founders and dealing maybe with the cultural points of into Asia? And how do we accelerate or grow that or improve that environment over the next while? What might be your response?
Who do you want to take that?
Well, I'll make a start, and I'll pass the baton on then. Well, I can give a perspective on on our situation in Ireland, which is, I don't even know if I would call it reasonable. It certainly could be better. And in terms of the funding for female founders, it's something we're tracking. The numbers are growing, and we've gone from 6% to maybe around 15%, depending on whether you value it by the size of the deal or the number of transactions. If you're looking at it in monetary terms, it's a little less. If you're looking at it in numbers of founders, it's a little higher. But I don't think less than 20% is anywhere that we would want to be. We are conducting an exercise at the moment in the IVCA throughout our members, and we're looking at the ratio and the breakdown of female investors, because oftentimes one of the more diverse the people making the investment decisions, the more likely diverse investments are going to be made. So that's kind of the perspective from Ireland. We don't have that data yet, but I think again it's not going to be parity, and I think that's probably where we would hope to be, and where we would like to be. But we are not there yet in Ireland. But I think Elaine and Bill might probably be able to give a better perspective of how that matches up in Asia.
Go, Elaine.
Yeah, well, I'd say a couple of things. First of all, we have about 35 people in Atlantic Bridge, and then we obviously have a joint venture in China. But out of the 21 kind of senior investment professionals, 7 are women, which is quite incredible. It's a third, so that would be punching well above the industry norms, which are sub 10%. I mean, in the Valley, I think it's about 6%, 7% female partner level. And it's interesting as we analyze that, my Chinese partner, Shua, is a woman, which is interesting, had a long career in Chinese technology companies. We have a lot of women in the medtech sector. We have female founders in our university fund, predominantly women in the medtech sector. So medtech is definitely, and by medtech I should say /biotech, that is definitely an area where you see more female founders. And we have, companies like Apis Protect in the agtech space, and you also have Xiaomi, Germaine in, oh gosh, I can't think of her company, Bill. That's Chinese founder, also, which is kind of in the agtech, biotech space as a female. So there's some good, I suppose, there's some shoots of optimism, but generally speaking, the backdrop is poor, which is why the likes of myself and Sarah Jane are involved with Level 20, which is all about getting to 20% at the investment level in the funds, because I think if you've got that diversity in the funds, you'll have a more openness to investing in female founders and female focused, by the way, products as well. Not just, obviously, why would you not want to be knowledgeable about 50% of the world's population that are going to be consumers of your product? So that's my experience. And then in China, on our China team, as I said, we've got Shua, and also on the investment team on the ground in Beijing and Hong Kong, we have one female partner there too. So you do see a lot of female Asian successful investment partners. Bill, I'd be loath to say it's a high percentage, but it's not. I would think they're better than the West. They're better than perhaps Palo Alto, but they're not maybe as high as the kind of numbers that we're at, say, here in actually in Ireland. We're not that bad, Sarah Jane. I don't know what the overall number is. It's probably not as high as a third, but I'd say we're up at in the teens. I mean, in all of the major VCs, female partners.
We are. What you see though is a difference. We're in the 30% at kind of the investment associate at the earlier levels, and then it's actually nudging close to 20, from what I can tell so far, but not quite at 20%.
Yeah.
And Bill, your pre-read, emphasizes you prioritize female founders. So maybe do you want to build on Elaine's comments?
Yeah, a bit. I mean, one of the frustrations that I have with my own firm is that we don't have any female general partners yet, and I really wish we did. At the same time, we do have women at partner level, and one of our first fund managers here is a woman, Katrina Kelleher. So we're happy about that. We've actually been #1 in the world in investing in female-led startups several times, and we're currently #5, and that's actually because there have been some recent entrants that are actually female only, which you know, I applaud. I still find in Ireland, because we have quite a high volume, you know, we have 1,140 startups in our portfolio, and you know, something around a third of those, you know, have female founders, if not female, you know, CEOs, other founders. I still get calls, you know, all the time about how the female founders are having a tough time raising in comparison around the world. Actually, in my experience, it is actually better in Asia, and it's worse here. And I think we have a long way to go in terms of purging a certain kind of mindset amongst certain investors in Ireland, and it really needs to be purged, because the way we look at it is, as Elaine said, you know, I would even go further and say it's actually a kind of strategic advantage for us, because we have good numbers that say that female founders are actually, in many respects, better. And so, you know, for selfish reasons, if not anything else, we want to make sure that every female founder gets a huge opportunity with our accelerators and our follow-on.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, and it's great to have this conversation. And I know Leo has dropped just to audio issues, but Enterprise Ireland put a lot of focus on this, and Julie Cinnamon, and building out the program, and growing numbers from a small base, but growing them quickly now to that point, and getting people into the conversation, which is really important. And it's probably a more mature conversation we've just had in the last 5 minutes, maybe, than we might have had here before, which is positive, I think. Yeah,
that's positive. What would be really positive is to see a lot more female founders applying to our accelerators. That will actually give me a Irish female founders. You know,
I gave you the sales pitch opportunity on the mid-tech question. I'm not doing it again.
And I think maybe just to close out on that point, you know, we would do some work with the I Wish Foundation, which is also based in Cork, which is a strong theme today. You know, but a lot of their research would show that, you know, even at a very early stage in terms of subject selection, girls often are motivated by careers where they can help people. And I think, you know, it's no accident then that, you know, if you go on and you know, everyone reinvents themselves every couple of years these days, when you look around and you're qualified in something in that field, and you decide to become an entrepreneur, you know, that you lean towards that, more women lean towards the medtech, biotech, life sciences space. You know, so there's something there, I think, to be harnessed and built on and leveraged into some of the other, you know, sectors that maybe seem more technical.
And Sergio, I think that point's really well made and resonates with me, actually. Sorry, Bill, go for it. Yeah,
just one crucial point on that, and this is something that I haven't yet figured out, right? You know, having launched Coder Dojo, having run it for many years, Coder Dojo is about a third girls to half girls, depending on, in some dojos are all girls. Working with Raspberry Pi, working with Coder Dojo, working with Code Club, working with I Wish, working with Black Girls Code, there is a point. It's about the age of 14 that somehow girls are getting the message that tech is not cool for them. And we see big drop-off numbers at that 14-year-old transition, and there is no good explanation for it. There really isn't. I mean, we've done lots of research, and there's no good explanation for it. And it's especially true in Ireland. There is a big drop-off there. You look at coolest projects, you look at all these things. So that is something, you know, if there's some researchers out there, that is something, if we could solve that, if we could crack that one nut, it would make a huge difference in the number of technical founders who are women.
No, that's really good. I feel we're at the start of a topic for another panel, another day, as we've had that 10 minutes. So we've only a couple of minutes to go, and I can see Martin virtually walking towards me to conclude. Well, I would like to ask you one question, right? And obviously, this panel has been a little bit mixed in terms of focus on market entry in China, but also trying to focus maybe on what interests China VCs and Ireland's place, Sarah, to what you're at in Ireland and the role you play. If there was a message that each of you would want to give in 30 seconds, 40 seconds of the key point or a point you haven't had a chance to make, what might that be for those that are listening, East or in Ireland? And And maybe Elaine, I'll start with you to give the others thinking time, seeing as you gave the presentation.
Yeah.
Well, look, I would say that I am 10 years working now in China and with China investors, customers, suppliers, all the things we talked about today. It has been a hugely rewarding and experience. It has been a journey of learning, and I am still learning. And sometimes I feel the more I learn, the less I know. But I've got fantastic partners in China, and our companies have been the benefit of that. So I am long on the business of keeping our trade relationships open and expanding and focusing on this market. And I also think we've just got to think long term. You know, we got to be in it for the long term and to be patient. But it is an incredibly worthwhile market for the right companies.
Great. Sarah Jane?
Yeah, well, I would just, set the scene or kind of finish off and talking about the here and now. We all know as we emerge from the challenge that COVID has brought globally to all of our economies, that there are going to be some countries that are winners, and there are going to be some countries that are, that are losers. And part of that is driven as much, by the government and the health response to the pandemic as it is to the economic response. I think in Ireland, particularly with the Q2 figures that we reported, most of that money went into established firms to extend their runway for up to 24 months. So we have a well capitalized sector in Ireland, and I think we are poised to be one of the winners. I think it's pretty clear. The Asian economies are a little further ahead of us because the pandemic hit early, and I think it's really clear that that there will be winners in Asia as well, and particularly in China. So I think my message is, as we emerge from this, that we emerge together, and we that level of collaboration and prosperity grows and continues.
Well done. I've left the final word to Bill, please.
So as a half Chinese Australian, I've traveled the world, every possible dimension. I've done business in China since the 80s, when it was really quite difficult, all the way through to today. We have huge footprints everywhere. There's a good reason to be in Ireland. My whole family is Australian and Chinese, and we live here in West Cork, and that is, Ireland is a really great place to live, and it's a really great place to access all the other markets on planet Earth. We are going to be the only truly English-speaking country in the EU in very short order. And there is a huge opportunity for Chinese investors, Chinese LPs, Chinese business people, Chinese corporates to really use Ireland as a fantastic, stable base to make big inroads into markets globally. And you would be really, really silly to ignore just how much power you can mobilize from here.
Great, well done. I know, Leo, through technology issues, but EI play a very important role, and certainly in the dialogue we had around this, are very focused on the Asian market in the remarks you made earlier. So I want to thank Leo, Bill, Sarah Jane, and Elaine. Thank you for the presentation. We've certainly had an interesting dialogue over the last hour. And Bill, I think well summed up by you, in that we're in the right place from a global perspective. And looking east is going to be very important to the next generation, as much as looking west. So with that, I'll hand back to Martin, I think, for the closing remarks on the conference. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Barry.
Thanks, Barry.
Good night.